Hi, my name is Emma. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who betrays her husband. But life has a way of leading us down unexpected paths, and this is my story. For 12 years, I've been married to Liam. We had what most people would call a stable, happy marriage. But over the years, something changed. Liam became distant, focused on work, and we started to drift apart. Enter Dr. James. He was my dentist, a man I trusted with my smile, but somehow he ended up capturing my heart. It all began during a routine appointment. His charming smile, the way he laughed at my jokes, it was harmless, I thought. But then, one day, as he adjusted the chair, his hand brushed against mine, and I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, but that moment replayed in my mind over and over. Soon, I found myself looking forward to my appointments, not for the treatment, but for him. Every smile, every touch, every conversation became more meaningful. I felt seen, truly seen. One rainy afternoon, as I was leaving the clinic, he offered me a ride home. I hesitated, but I said yes. We sat in his car, the rain tapping on the roof, and for the first time, we talked about more than teeth. He opened up about his life, his dreams, his regrets. I listened, feeling a connection I hadn't felt in years. As he parked in front of my house, our eyes met. There was a silence, heavy with unspoken words, and then he leaned in and kissed me, softly at first, testing the waters. I didn't pull away. The kiss deepened, and suddenly, everything else disappeared. The guilt, the fear, all of it faded. When it ended, we both sat in silence. I wanted to apologize, to say something, but no words came out. He reached out, took my hand, and said, "I've been waiting for this moment longer than you can imagine." I didn't know how to respond. My heart was racing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. That night, as I lay next to Liam in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about James. His words, his touch, they haunted me. The next week, I had another appointment with him. I told myself it would just be professional, but it wasn't. When I walked into the clinic, he smiled at me, and I felt that same spark again. After the appointment, he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. I hesitated, but found myself saying yes. We went to a small cafe nearby. Sitting across from him, I felt more alive than I had in years. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, I felt truly seen. But then, as he reached across the table to touch my hand, reality hit me. I was a married woman. "I can't do this," I whispered, pulling my hand away. But he didn't let go so easily. "Emma, I know this is complicated," he said, "but I can't ignore how I feel about you." His words left me breathless. I wanted to protest, to walk away, but instead I stayed. That afternoon, we ended up back at his apartment. I told myself it was just a talk, but it wasn't. As the door closed behind us, the tension became unbearable. He pulled me into his arms, and I didn't resist. What happened next was a blur of passion and desire. For the first time in years, I felt wanted, desired, alive. But when it was over, reality came crashing down. The guilt was immediate and suffocating. James held me, whispering that everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't. I went home that night, avoiding Liam's gaze. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Days turned into weeks, and my affair with James continued. Each time, I told myself it would be the last, but every time I saw him, I couldn't resist. He became my escape, my addiction. Then, one evening, Liam came home earlier than expected and found me on the phone with James. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but the look on his face told me he already knew. Liam didn't say anything else that night, but his silence was deafening. I could feel the distance growing between us. The next day, James texted me asking if I was okay. I wanted to tell him everything, but couldn't. Instead, I agreed to meet him. We sat in his car, parked in a secluded spot, as I poured out my fears. "Liam suspects something," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what to do." James reached over, brushing a tear from my cheek. "Emma, you don't have to face this alone," he whispered. But I did. That night, Liam confronted me. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes burning. I tried to deny it, but Liam had seen enough. He pulled out his phone, showing me a photo of James' car outside our house. Is this why you've been so distant? He asked. Because of him? His voice cracked and I felt my heart shatter. I broke down, confessing everything. The appointments, the coffee, the nights with James, every detail. Liam didn't yell or scream. He just stood there, silent and broken, before walking out the door. For weeks, I tried to reach him, but he wouldn't answer my calls or texts. I felt the weight of my choices crushing me. James tried to comfort me, but it wasn't the same. The passion that once consumed us now felt hollow and meaningless. One day, I went to his clinic to end things. I can't do this anymore, I told him, tears in my eyes. James looked at me, his expression unreadable. I understand, he said softly, but his voice carried a hint of sadness. Walking away from James was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Now I'm left to pick up the pieces of my life. Liam has filed for divorce, and I can't blame him. Every day, I wake up with the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The guilt, the regret, it's overwhelming. If I could go back in time, I'd do everything differently. But life doesn't give us second chances. To anyone listening to this, let my story be a cautionary tale. Temptation may be thrilling, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is often far greater than you can imagine. Betrayal leaves scars that never truly heal. Months have passed since Liam left, but the memories of that night still haunt me. I've tried to move on, to rebuild my life, but every step forward feels like a reminder of what I've lost. One evening, while sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of Liam and me on our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. It made me wonder how we got here, how I let it all fall apart. I decided to write Liam a letter, not to win him back, but to apologize, to tell him the truth. Liam, I began, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I poured my heart into that letter, admitting my faults, my regrets, and the pain I caused him. When I finished, I folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope, not knowing if he'd ever read it. The next morning, I left it in his mailbox. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. A week later, I received a text from Liam. I got your letter, it said. I need time, but thank you for your honesty. His response brought me a small sense of closure, but I knew our story was far from over. As for James, I haven't seen or spoken to him since the day I ended things. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks of me, but those thoughts are fleeting. My focus now is on healing, on becoming someone I can be proud of. I started therapy, hoping to understand why I made the choices I did. It hasn't been easy, but it's helping. My therapist once asked me, "What would you say to the old Emma if you could?" The question left me speechless. After some thought, I said, I'd tell her to cherish what she has before it's too late. Those words have stayed with me, a reminder of the life I had and the mistakes that cost me everything. I'm not sure if Liam and I will ever find our way back to each other, but I've learned not to dwell on what ifs. For now, I'm focusing on the present, on rebuilding my life one day at a time. To anyone listening to this, I hope my story serves as a lesson. Love is fragile, and trust is even more so. Don't take what you have for granted, and don't let temporary desires destroy something lasting. As for me, I'll carry the weight of my choices for the rest of my life, but I'm learning to live with it, and maybe, just maybe, one day I'll find a way to forgive myself. Months turned into a year, and the pain began to dull, though it never truly disappeared. I focused on work, spent more time with friends, and tried to fill the void that my mistakes had created. One day, while walking through the park, I saw a couple sitting on a bench, holding hands and laughing. It reminded me of the early days with Liam, when everything felt effortless and full of promise. That evening, I sat down and wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I poured out my thoughts, my regrets, and my hopes for the future. It felt cathartic, like a small step toward healing. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to a mutual friend's party. I knew Liam would be there. I debated whether to go, but eventually decided that facing him was something I needed to do. When I arrived, I spotted him almost immediately. He was standing by the bar, talking to a friend. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I gathered my courage and walked over to him. "Hi, Liam," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Hi, Emma," he replied. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I wasn't sure I'd come. We stood there in silence for a moment before he broke it. "How have you been?" he asked. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I've been trying to figure things out," I admitted. He nodded, his gaze softening. "Me too," he said. "It hasn't been easy." We talked for a while about work, mutual friends, even the weather. It felt strange, but also comforting. As the night went on, I realized how much I'd missed him, not just as a partner, but as a friend. When it was time to leave, he walked me to my car. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said. "You too," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The next day, I decided to take another step toward healing. I called my therapist and scheduled a session. In therapy, I began to unpack the reasons behind my action, the insecurities and unmet needs that had led me astray. It was a painful process, but it also felt liberating. For the first time, I started to understand myself. As weeks turned into months, I found myself feeling lighter, more in control of my life. Liam and I occasionally exchanged texts, nothing significant, but it was a start. One day, he invited me to grab coffee. "No expectations," he said. "Just two old friends catching up." I agreed, and when we met, it felt like a small step toward something I couldn't quite define. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I walked away from that cafe, I realized that healing takes time, but it's possible. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for a new beginning, one built on honesty and trust. The days that followed our coffee meeting were filled with cautious optimism. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder if Liam and I could ever rebuild what we had lost. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Liam. "Can we talk?" The message read. My heart raced as I typed back, "Of course." "When?" He suggested meeting at the park the next day. I arrived early, my nerves getting the better of me. Liam showed up a few minutes later, looking calm but serious. We sat on a bench, the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. He told me about the pain he had felt, the betrayal, and how he had struggled to move forward. But then he said something that surprised me. "I've also realized that no one is perfect, not even me." I looked at him, unsure of what to say. "I'm not saying I can forget what happened," he continued, "but I'm willing to try." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "I want to try too," I said. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it." From that day on, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks. We started with small things, texting more often, meeting for coffee, sharing updates about our lives. Eventually, we decided to attend couples therapy. It was awkward at first, but it helped us understand each other better. Liam admitted that he had been emotionally distant in our marriage, and I acknowledged my own fault. Through these sessions, we began to rediscover the connection we had lost over the years. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Liam said something that stayed with me. "I don't know if we'll ever go back to how we were," he said. "But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we can build something better." His words gave me hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same team again. As the months went by, things slowly improved. We started spending more time together, laughing and reminiscing. One day, Liam surprised me with a small gift, a photo frame with a picture of us from our early days. "I found this while cleaning out some old boxes," he said. It reminded me of why we started this journey together. Tears welled up in my eyes as I took the frame from him. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. That moment felt like a turning point, a sign that maybe, just maybe, we were on the path to healing. But healing wasn't linear. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past threatened to pull us back. In those moments, we leaned on each other, reminding ourselves why we were fighting for this. And slowly, the weight of the past began to lift. The scars remained, but they no longer defined us. Now, as I sit here reflecting on everything, I realize how far we've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. To anyone listening to this, know that mistakes don't have to define you. With time and effort, redemption is possible. And while the scars of betrayal may never fully fade, they can serve as a reminder of the strength it takes to reap. As the years went by, Liam and I found a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We learned to communicate better, to truly listen to each other. It felt like we were rebuilding from the ground up. One day, while walking through the same park where Liam and I had our first conversation after the affair, he stopped. He turned to me and said, "Do you remember this place?" I nodded, my heart tightening at the memory. "This was where I decided to give us another chance," he said. "And I'm glad I did." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I'm glad too," I whispered. In that moment, it felt like we had come full circle. As our relationship strengthened, I started to feel more confident in myself as well. I began pursuing hobbies I had neglected for years. Liam supported me in every step. Whether it was my painting classes or yoga sessions, he encouraged me to find myself again. In turn, I encouraged him to take time for himself. He started volunteering at a local shelter, something he had always wanted to do. It was as if we were rediscovering not just each other, but also the individuals we had lost along the way. One evening, while sitting on the couch, Liam pulled out an old scrapbook from our early days of marriage. We laughed at the photos, reminiscing about the memories they held. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I said. He nodded, a soft smile on his face. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything," he replied. His words warmed my heart. But despite the progress we had made, there were still moments when the past lingered in the background. During one particularly difficult evening, I asked Liam, "Do you ever regret giving me another chance?" He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "No," he said. "I regret what happened, but not the choice to try again." His honesty brought tears to my eyes. "I don't deserve you," I said, my voice breaking, "but I'm so grateful for you." He reached out, taking my hand. "We're in this together, Emma. Always," he said. His words were a balm to my soul. As time passed, the pain of the past began to feel like a distant memory replaced by the joy of the present. We celebrated milestones together, like our anniversary, which felt like a testament to our resilience. For our anniversary, Liam surprised me with a trip to the countryside, a place we had always talked about visiting. We spent the weekend hiking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. It felt like a new beginning. On the last evening of the trip, as we watched the sunset, Liam turned to me and said, "I'm proud of us." I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes. "I am too," I said. "We fought for this, and it was worth it." That sunset felt symbolic, a closing chapter to the pain, and a bright beginning to a new phase of our lives. Now, as I look back on everything, I realize how much I've learned, not just about love, but about myself. Life is messy and people make mistakes, but it's what we do after those mistakes that defines who we are. Liam and I aren't perfect, but we found a way to make our imperfections work together. To anyone listening, I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to fight for what matters. Love, trust, and forgiveness are fragile, but with effort and patience, they can grow stronger than ever. And while the scars of the past will always remain, they can also serve as reminders of the strength it takes to heal. As Liam and I settled into our renewed relationship, we found joy in the little things, cooking dinner together, taking long walks, and even working on a garden we'd neglected for years. It was as if we were rediscovering not just each other, but the life we had always wanted to build. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, Liam found our wedding vows. "Do you remember this?" he asked, holding up the piece of paper with a nostalgic smile. I took the vows from his hand, reading the words we had written so many years ago. Tears welled up in my eyes. We promised to always fight for each other, I said softly. I guess we finally kept that promise. Liam nodded, his gaze warm and steady. And I promised to keep fighting for you, for us, he said. Those words stayed with me, a reminder of how far we had come and the strength we had found in each other. Over time, our home began to feel lighter, filled with laughter